you guys have thought about getting a tattoo before. Okay, so have I. But unfortunately, growing up, getting a tattoo is something I was actually told is pretty taboo or unideal. And as a Hispanic woman, I noticed that this is a stigma that comes predominantly from people of my culture. So it made me curious, what are the origins of tattoos in Hispanic culture, and where might these stigmas come from? So focusing specifically on Aztec and Mayan culture, I want to go over what some of the really traditional symbols and images you'd see being tattooed in Mesoamerica were. Secondly, I want to go over how the actual physical act of tattooing carried a lot of significance in those societies. And lastly, I want to explore how getting a tattoo today, maybe with some of the same symbols, doesn't really mean the same thing it did thousands of years ago. So starting with Aztec culture, there were some really common symbols and images that you'd see people getting tattooed. And in one article from April 2019 called Aztec Designs and Symbols for Tattoos, history publisher Scott Rank explained that Aztec eagle designs usually show the eagle with its head turned to the left or west and its beak open. So a lot of Aztec warriors would get an eagle as a tattoo because they really appreciated the bravery and power that it symbolized. But as you can see, there was a really specific way to get it. It wasn't really open for stylistic interpretation. Similarly, in Mayan culture also had really specific standards for how they got their tattoos, but they took it a step further in incorporating tattoos into their daily life. So in a February 2016 article titled "The Mayans, the Ritual of Tattooing," tattoo journalist Elijah Belden explains how tattooing was actually used to reinforce faithfulness in children. And in her quote, she says, "It was usually on their chest, stomach, or wrist and would imply devotion and loyalty to a particular god of choice." So as you can see, in both Aztec and Mayan culture, tattoos were used for very individual purposes to reinforce beliefs that really spoke to you, or maybe a deity that you really connected with. But it's important to note that there were very specific standards for how your tattoo looked and where it was placed on your body. And while the actual symbol and image was very important, sometimes the actual act of getting and creating the tattoo and just wearing it on your body carried a lot more meaning. So think about it, today, even with modern technology and a nice tattoo gun, when you get a tattoo, you'll bleed. And the Aztecs took this very seriously. So in a 2017 article online called "The Ancient History of Body Modification in Mesoamerica, Practiced by Aztecs, Mayans, and Olmecs," it was noted that the Aztecs believed that the spirit essence of man exists in their blood. So tattoos function not only as a way to show your respect for a god, but the actual act of getting tattooed functioned as a very personal, physical form of sacrifice. You're actually giving of your blood. And similarly, the Mayans were a very religious people, but they used the act of wearing the tattoo. They saw it as kind of a responsibility depending on your role in society. In a 2019 article from History on the Net, it notes, "The noble class performed as many body modifications as they could, as Mayans believed the more extreme the modification, the higher the status of the individual. So tattoos designated their social status, specialized skills, and religious power." So tattoos served a lot of different functions in society. For example, you might see a priest walking around with inked all over his body. So for Aztecs and Mayans, it went beyond just what the end product of the tattoo was, but really wearing it showed who you were, what you were capable of, and what you appreciated, and what your role was in society. So while tattoos were very significant and carried a lot of meaning, and there were very strict standards of tattooing thousands of years ago, that's not always the case today. One similarity we see is that tattooing is still used as a form of religious reinforcement. My father's a tattoo artist, and I actually asked him, because the demographic he works for is predominantly Hispanic, so I asked him, what are some common tattoos you'll see or people will request related to our culture? And he said it's really common to get a scripture in Spanish, a scripture that means a lot to you. And I thought that was interesting, because while modern tattoos may not work to convey the same exact religious beliefs they did thousands of years ago, it's still very common to use it to reinforce your religious beliefs today. However, one thing that hasn't been withheld is the very strict standard of tattooing. So In a 2017 article, anthropologists Arkita Day and Kosov Das explained that today, tattoo carries a meaning, a story which is very own and very individualistic. That's why a completely same image of a tattoo can carry a different meaning to its owner and sometimes even to the viewers. So today there's a lot of different styles of tattooings, different line work types, and tattoos are very personal and open to stylistic interpretation. You can see someone today who they might have an eagle tattoo, but the beak might be closed. It might be facing west instead of east. They might have gotten the tattoo just because they think it's cool, not necessarily because they're going off to war and want to invoke the power of an eagle's bravery. So again, I think it's interesting to note that while you may see some of the exact same tattoos today, they don't always carry the same significance and meaning. And going back to the stigma that I noticed in our culture of tattoos being kind of taboo, I think this kind of explains it, because getting a tattoo was no joke to our ancestors. It was a really big deal and carried a lot of meaning. So I think that's why, I talk to older people in my culture, and they really they ask you to think twice before getting a tattoo. So with that in mind, for everyone that raised their hand today, myself included, I think it's worth considering, what are your intentions behind getting the tattoo, and maybe even looking into what it might have meant thousands of years ago. Thank you.